Everybody to our first virtual Up and Atom. Please bear with us as we're trying to figure this out. As you know, I'm sure that everybody who's working right now has gone through this. So this is our first attempt at running one of these. So far, so good, we think. Allison talked a little bit about some of the logistics on how you can ask questions. You can either ask a question written at any time, or you can raise your hand and we can bring you into the meeting to ask your question. Again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an interesting few months, obviously, for everybody. I just wanted to let you know that we're still trying to do what we can do at CNTA and keeping going with some of our education initiatives. Obviously, our outreach and in-person, person-to-person type interactions have kind of screeched to a halt, but that doesn't mean that we haven't kept going with other things. So in the last couple months, we've awarded 6 $500 educator grants to teachers both in Georgia and South Carolina. I think it was about a split of 3 and 3. We awarded 3 essay contests scholarships in the amount of $1,000 to 3 seniors or just recent graduates, 2 in South Carolina and 1 in Georgia. And we also just recently awarded the $5,000 Mars Scholarship, which is sponsored by SRR and Momentum. And that $5,000 scholarship went to a rising senior at South Carolina State University. So we are continuing to try to do all we can to talk about nuclear and to express all the good things that everyone is doing. And in so doing, we're really happy to be able to make these awards. Today, we have our first virtual Up and Atom speaker, who many of you know from the past, Dave Amerine. Dave has 44 years of nuclear industry experience. He began his career in the U.S. Navy after graduating from the Naval Academy. And while he was after graduating from the Naval Academy, he obtained a master's in management from the Naval Postgraduate School. He's also led several very large projects in his career. As you know, he's been part of the leadership team at 8 different nuclear plants. And in the DOE nuclear complex, especially at Savannah River, his footprint is everywhere. He worked in startup and kicking off the replacement tritium facility, also the Defense Waste Processing Facility, and then more recently on the salt waste processing facility. So his efforts have been significant and very impactful to us here at Savannah River. So based on all of these experiences, Dave has written a book that's called Push It to Move It, Lessons Learned from a Career in Nuclear Project Management. And I encourage everyone to take a look at that. I'm sure it's available on Amazon, or Dave can let us know where it's available. But take a look at that, and some of the things I think Dave is going to talk to us today about are reflected from what he's learned over his career and what's in his book. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave, and Dave will kick us off with this presentation. Take it away, Dave.
All right, Jim, thank you very much. It's good to be back in Aiken, sort of. Aiken was home for my wife and I for off and on for 25 years. And my younger daughter graduated from South Aiken High, where she was MVP on the tennis team her junior year. Again, thank you for inviting me to talk to you about a very important issue, electrical power sources in our country and the world. I believe nuclear power is essential as we move into the beginning of this century and beyond. However, at present, our country is struggling with making decisions that could affect the future for a very long time. Much of what I present here today is also in my book that Jim already covered. So I will not read the following slides to you, but rather talk about their content while you read them. So let's get started. All generations aspire to an increase in the standard of living for their children and their grandchildren. The standard of living is a function of the gross national product, and that requires electricity that is reliable and relatively cheap. For the standard of living to continue to increase, demand for electricity will only go up. Energy independence would dramatically change international politics. Worldwide studies indicate that the prices of natural gas will increase in the next several decades, and oil prices will fall. In other words, their prices are volatile. A cogent national energy strategy would consider this aspect and consider nuclear fuel's relative cost stability, as well as the overall reliability of nuclear energy. Because of their unpredictable nature, wind and solar as sources of electricity require backup of complementary carbon-based fast ramp power, which actually results in an overall increase in the carbon footprint. With regard to reducing the carbon footprint, I believe this concern is important, but I believe as a health issue due to air quality. Now, all of these bullets indicate nuclear power should be an essential component for our national strategy. Remember, nuclear power as an implied technology for producing electricity is not much more than 60 years old. Nuclear power safety record is unmatched by any industry. No American civilian has been harmed by nuclear power. Nuclear power has minimum impact on the environment, much less than any other source of electricity. With respect to reliability is measured by capacity factor, and capacity factor is basically for a unit of time, if you have in the denominator 100% power, and in the numerator you have actually how much power was produced during that unit of time. That's capacity factor. Nuclear has the best capacity factor of all sources by almost a factor of 2, with coal being the next at 55% or plus or minus. And then you drop down to natural gas between 35 and 40%. Wind and solar, of course, don't even move the needle off the peg. Nuclear is economical when the total plant lifespan is considered due to the relative low cost of its fuel. And the next generation of reactors, called Generation 4, will be much less expensive to build and to operate. Now, regarding energy density, a fuel pellet, as I'm sure most of you know, is very small. It's less than 1/4 of an inch in diameter normally, and not even 1/2 of an inch in length. And that's equal to about 120 gallons of oil or 1 ton of coal. And nuclear technology also contributes to other uses, such as medical isotopes. Nuclear fuel supply is virtually inexhaustible, especially if we were to recycle the spent fuel rods that presently reside in our spent fuel pools, because they have almost 95% of their uranium still available. And I could go into an explanation of why that's true. Another consideration is thorium, the 14th most prevalent substance in our Earth's crust, if we were to use that as a nuclear fuel. As far as the last 2 bullets on this slide, I'll elaborate on those later. Okay, these are the questions that frequently come up when talking about nuclear energy, and I'm going to address each one of them in the next couple slides. 3 Mile Island was an accident that happened in Pennsylvania in 1979. Maybe some of you don't remember that, weren't around then, but no one member of the American public received any exposure to contamination created by that accident, most of which was contained inside the reactor and the containment building. The other plants at 3 Mile Island were eventually restored to operation without incident for over their lifespan. More important, the nuclear industry created an instrument for self-monitoring and improvement called the Institute of Nuclear Power Operation, or INPO. As a result of sharing, information sharing, increased training, increased oversight, using lessons learned at one plant to benefit all other facilities, the safety and efficiency statistics of our nuclear fleet have steadily improved ever since 3 Mile Island. Now, Chernobyl was a careless operation of a nuclear plant whose design would never have been approved in the United States, or for that matter, any country abiding by the regulations and oversight of the International Atomic Energy Agency or the World Association of Nuclear Operators. Additionally, the steam explosion occurred in a part of the plant that would have been inside containment in this country and most other countries, which would have limited, if not prevented, the spread of contamination experienced. At Fukushima, the initial reactions of equipment and personnel to the earthquake were as planned. However, the tsunami was far greater than the restraining wall was designed to handle. The design of the emergency diesel generators and their supply tanks is not what we have in this country. In this country, the diesel generators are in what are called hardened buildings, which can resist tremendous storms and earthquakes and so forth. And our fuel tanks are underground. The fuel tanks at Japan were above ground and were swept away by the tsunami. The inability to immediately react to the situation once it occurred exacerbated the emergency. Decisions U.S. plant managers would have made here were pushed much further up the management chain, taking precious time before action happened, and in some cases precluding happening, such as venting the containment of accumulating hydrogen gases, which ultimately caused the explosion. Nevertheless, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, INPO, and our nuclear utilities made a concerted effort to learn any possible lessons from what happened and the root causes of what made it worse, to see what, if any, improvements needed to be made in our present design, operating procedures, and emergency preparations. Even with present reactors, if spent fuel rods were recycled to recover 95% of that unused uranium, the total waste, if all of the electricity for the entire United States was produced only by nuclear power, would cover a single football field 10 feet high. And we know what to do with it. We have been immobilizing highly radioactive nuclear waste from the Manhattan Project since 1997 and safely storing it in stainless steel canisters at the Defense Waste Processing Facility, for which I was the program manager for its construction, completion, and startup. And Joe Ortaldo, who I know is on the line, was a valuable resource in making that happen as well. Most Generation 4 reactor designs will consume most of the radionuclides and produce much less radioactive waste. The issue of nuclear waste in the United States is not a physical problem, but rather a political one. Present Generation 3 reactor capital costs and the low price of natural gas make nuclear plants less cost competitive on a near-term basis. However, fossil fuel prices are volatile and bound to go up as supply decreases. Nuclear fuel prices are more stable, especially considering the long run. Because of the inherent safety designs of the new Generation 4 plants, there will be less safety system redundancy and possibly less robust containment requirements. These features could result in costs as much as 70% less than today's reactors. Modular in-factory build and construction will reduce construction time and cost, especially for the small modular reactor designs. Molten salt reactor design cost reductions include no enrichment of the fuel or fabrication costs of the fuel. Wind and solar require government subsidies and foreign materials to even exist. Okay, frankly, if security and overall safety relative to external forces was a problem, it would have happened by now. At least that's my opinion. While we can never let down our guard, the security of nuclear material and fuel is just not a problem, as the opponents make it out to be. There are much easier and potentially more impactful targets for terrorists than nuclear materials, despite what you see in the movies or hear from the anti-nuclear advocates. Our electrical energy sources must be reliable, relatively cheap, and environmentally benign. Wind and solar are none of these, while nuclear is all of them. The area required for wind or solar to provide equivalent energy to nuclear is truly staggering. Davis-Besse Nuclear Station, which is right across the lake from my home, I get to see the cooling tower each morning when I wake up, is about 900 megawatts electrical. An equivalent energy source would require a windmill farm from Detroit to Buffalo, 1/4 mile deep, or a solar farm covering 8,100 acres. The upkeep alone of these systems would be prohibitive. Solar panels use environmentally hazardous chemicals to keep the collectors clean and functioning. Windmills would wreak havoc on the bird population, including rare birds like the bald eagle that I see flying in front of my home occasionally, and their populations are just now recovering. Also, and a lot of people don't know this, there are over 14,000 idle windmills in this country needing repairs, which have proven too costly to do. Both wind and solar depend on rare earth metals from China. With the exception of Germany, where all the reactors are scheduled to be shut down by 2022 due to Green Party influence, and that's already proving to be having a disastrous impact. All other countries are pursuing the nuclear option as part of their energy portfolio. Because we have failed in the past to establish a real consistent, cogent, cohesive, cognitive energy policy, we seem to just be dithering. As a result, we will relinquish our leadership and fall behind in the knowledge and application of this significant energy source. This will also impact our capabilities in associated technologies. Most important, I feel the standards that we have set in safety, quality, and conduct of operations will slip with countries such as China, Russia, and India taking the lead. And we will lose out on the expanding worldwide market for nuclear power and its associated equipment and technologies. Here are quotes from a few of the organizations which have an interest in energy in general. While you're reading those, let me say that ASME went on to explain that the real impact of the problems like the ones I reviewed earlier, or even a worst case accident, is the social economic impact of both the near and long term, as opposed to actual physical harm. By the way, CSIS is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. DBA, well, that's me. And even though I sit on the shores of a large potable water lake, Lake Erie, we're still experiencing it worldwide, a diminishing supply of our potable water. I think that's a problem looming for our future generations. Nuclear power has not been actively promoted and is usually associated with those previously mentioned accidents. Opponents of nuclear have stopped the building of new nuclear power stations, essentially. I know Vogtle is still under construction. They've prevented the operation of fully or nearly completed nuclear plants like the ones on Long Island. They've blocked the processing of nuclear residuals and prohibited the burial of those same nuclear residuals at any site, like Yucca Mountain. These actions have denied our country access to an enormously large, environmentally clean energy source. The current cost and focus on natural gas and the abundance of coal present a significant challenge to the support of nuclear at this time. However, the CSIS that I mentioned earlier on the previous slide has stated that fossil fuels will eventually be exhausted and along the way will become more and more expensive, especially if externalized costs, that's the cost to the environment, were to be considered. The Generation 4 reactors, the next phase of reactors, are passively safe. In the case of a worst case accident, No initial operator or equipment action would be required to maintain core cooling for as much as 72 hours. Now, this should not be interpreted that the present reactors are unsafe. However, the redundancy of safety systems and robust containments required by the present Generation 3 plants drives up the costs of construction and operation. The beneficial features of the next generation, called Generation 4 reactors, needs to be properly explained to the public, to financial entities that finance these plants, and to politicians. Small modular reactors may be the wave of the future. Molten salt reactor, like a liquid fluoride thorium reactor, a design I favor, can be applied in the small modular reactor venue. Higher operating temperatures of the Generation 4 reactors offer the possibilities of process stream for industrial activities, such as the production of hydrogen. The government and industry must engage and educate the public as well as political leaders much better than has been done in the past. As I said earlier, waste, nuclear waste, is the good news. It's really just a political and financial issue, not a technical one. Construction, time, and cost must be reduced, and that's possible with these Generation 4 reactors. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has and is addressing streamlining of the licensing process. A safety culture and a safety-conscious work environment are critical components of any successful nuclear endeavor, and I can go into that at length if anyone wants. Security risks, particularly proliferation, are, in my opinion, overstated, but that's the world that we live in. With respect to the infrastructure required to support nuclear construction and operation, there are 1/3 as many vendors today as there were in the 1970s. And many of those do not have the requisite nuclear quality assurance programs that they once had and that they need. This situation must be addressed. However, right now, more than 20 United States companies are developing advanced reactor designs that can completely change the way we think about the industry. These new reactor designs will be smaller, more flexible, and less expensive to build and operate. However, government support and engagement is needed. These situations are the result of a lack of resolve to address the energy challenge our country has had in the past. We must come to grips with our energy situation before it reaches extremis. The challenge, as I've said before, is to develop a consistent policy for our country that bridges administration changes and has foresight and strategic thought. This requires political leadership that understands the challenge and puts the country's energy future as a top priority in a bipartisan effort. This needs to supersede any political considerations. Now, there is good news. President Trump's comprehensive strategy revised capabilities of the uranium mining, milling, and conversion industries. It strengthens U.S. technology supremacy and drives U.S. exports, consistent with U.S. non-proliferation objectives and national security. It establishes the National Reactor Innovation Center, which provides a platform for private sector developers to assess the performance of their reactor concepts. The Department of Energy's investments include supporting industry efforts to design and submit an NRC license application for a new fuel fabrication facility, including ultimately producing an incredibly robust fuel, I think it's called TRISO, for the next generation reactors. The versatile test reactor will speed up the development of molten salts for the use in some advanced reactor designs, including the aforementioned liquid fluoride thorium reactor. Small modular reactors have simplified, compact designs that will dramatically reduce the footprint of the plant and have a smaller emergency planning zones that will allow them to be sited virtually anywhere. The Department of Energy is working with NuScale Power Company to develop the company's factory-built small modular reactors. Nuclear power plants can produce hydrogen in a variety of methods. Its high quality steam can be electrolyzed and split into pure hydrogen and pure oxygen. The new regulatory guidance is expected to significantly reduce the uncertainty challenging the industry while streamlining the advanced reactor design and licensing processes. The Department of Energy is advertising now an aggressive approach to demonstrating the Generation 4 reactor capabilities. So the sum of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's revised licensing process is that an applicant is not required to make substantial financial or organizational commitments until it knows that it has already approved reactor design as part of its application, an already approved site through the early site permitting process, and an operating license before it has to make any substantial financial commitment necessary to begin construction. Operating excellence achieved since 3 Mile Island must be maintained, since a problem in the nuclear industry anywhere is a problem everywhere. Nuclear matches well with the large, reliable, environmentally benign electrical generation capacity requirements. Nuclear power plants provide the safest, cleanest form of energy the world has ever known. Yet alternate energy advocates attack it as unsafe and propose instead something which is actually far less safe and which in any case cannot be put into operation on a large scale. And I've demonstrated that before with the Davis-Besse equivalents. Instead of facts, they give us scare stories. Any conversation about electrical generation and the environment that does not include nuclear is worse than specious. It is disingenuous. We have desperately needed a cogent long-term energy strategy for a long time. In my opinion, this strategy needs nuclear generation of electricity as its core component. If we let the production of nuclear electricity in this country atrophy, it will not be easily recovered, and it will be very expensive to do so. Instead of being an export of technology and equipment, we will unnecessarily become an importer, and in my opinion, at great peril for the whole world. In the face of present concerted propaganda and misinformation, it is no wonder that Americans are fearful of nuclear power. And still, it has about a 60% approvability when public is polled. But they're just not being told the facts of the case. The energy source of solar and wind that has been advertised as a future of electrical generation is a delusion. The nuclear energy source that we've been told is fraught with mortal danger is in fact cheap, clean, and comparatively safe. In it lies our best hope for the future. While there is good news stated in the previous slides, there are also challenges. More needs to be done, and with a sense of urgency. So those of you here cannot be just nuclear career professionals. You must be nuclear evangelists. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I'd be glad to try to handle any questions and answers that they have, Jim.
Great, thank you very much, Dave. And as we get going, maybe I'll just kick off with a quick question. Hopefully you can respond to. And I know you've given this presentation or similar presentations to a lot of legislative groups and stakeholder groups. Can you talk a little bit about those and provide us some insight into what the reaction or response has been from those folks when you've given presentations to?
That's a very good question. And I have, in fact, been asked to go down to Columbus, Ohio and speak to members of our legislature, particularly most recently in support of House Bill 6, which basically diverted the funds that the ratepayers were paying to support wind and solar and diverted some of that to support our 2 nuclear plants, Davis-Besse and Perry. And so the passing of House Bill 6, which is presently still being challenged, is reflective of the fact that these legislators were eager to learn about energy and learn about nuclear in particular. It's interesting to note that the challenge here to House Bill 6 is being financed by the American Petroleum Institute. Now, why would that be? Well, as I said earlier, wind and solar are only available about 30% of the time. And so these fast responding Rankine cycle power plants are fueled by what? Natural gas and or oil. So as I've always used to tell my wife, you know, just follow the money. One other thing I would say in answering your question, Jim, that sort of emphasizes the need for those of us who believe in nuclear energy to get out and talk to the public. When I speak to high school kids or junior high kids, trying to encourage them to enter the technical sciences and so forth, I ask them the question, where do they think the power comes from for the lights in the classroom that they're sitting, or their lights and heat at home, or in the offices and factories where their parents work? And across the board, they will say wind and solar. And in Ohio, wind and solar provides less than 1% of our electricity, but they've done a much better job than nuclear in promoting themselves.
Thank you. I think there's some other questions. Maybe Allison, why don't you start moderating those, please?
Sure. So far we have a couple of questions in the Q&A area. And the first one is, why does Gen 4 produce less waste? Fission is fission products. Why is Gen 4 better in waste production?
Well, the short answer is that the design, particularly like, for example, the liquid fluoride thorium reactor that I mentioned, actually consumes the radionuclides. A lot of them actually become either fission products or they decay to less radioactive substances. That's a very short answer, but that's how the design of many of the Generation 4 plants do consume a number of radionuclides or fission products that are produced.
Okay, the next question was, do you have ideas on how we can impact more on children's thinking so they begin life with a better understanding of the concerns that you've brought up?
Well, that's an absolutely excellent question. And I would recommend people, even in South Carolina and Georgia, where I think there's a general acceptance of things nuclear by the public, thanks to the interface between Savannah Riverside and the public, but is to get out into the grade schools, the junior highs and the high schools. They're always looking for presenters to come in from the outside on any subject matter and educate these young people on the safety and the benefits of nuclear power. As I said, when I asked those kids, you know, where do you think this electricity is coming from? Their answer was completely wrong, but that's what they see in the news and on the TV, and so that's what they think. So we have to become, as I said in my very last slide, we have to become nuclear evangelists.
The next question is, do you see Americans getting behind the SMRs since they're going to cost less than the larger traditional plants?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that question. Could you say it again?
So the SMRs, you know, they're expected to cost less, they're going to use less space, etc. And so do you think the American public that'll be more palatable? Do you think that would be an easier sell than the traditional larger plants?
Oh, the small modular reactors?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The small modular reactors have a number of advantages over the big, large behemoths that we have right now. Number one is that you can do in-factory assembly and then just move that to the construction sites, and that will save a lot of time and cost. Number two, a lot of the small modular reactors will actually be built underground, and that will possibly eliminate some of the very robust containment requirements that we have. And so there really are a lot of advantages. Another one is you can build these plants because they'll be able to be built faster as the energy demand increases. So you can tailor the size and the number of small modular reactors you want or that you need to the actual demand. So I see a lot of advantages to small modular reactors.
So those were all of the questions that had been typed in to ask. Do any of our attendees want to raise your hand and ask a question, or are we set with questions? It's the $1 million question. Well, while I'm giving you a chance to think about that, this presentation is being recorded and it will be uploaded to CNTA's YouTube and will be linked to our website. And so by the end of the weekend, we should have it up on the website, and I will be sending a link out. And I'm sure Dave will provide you contact information if you have further questions. But
yeah, people can reach me very easily at my email, which is damerine@aol.com. I'm one of the few people that still have an AOL.
So
my first initial tacked onto my last name.
I think, Ken, are you there? Do you have a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Dave. Ken Bear here. I worked with you a little bit at DWPF.
Hi, Ken.
Good morning. We formed a company in Aiken. We're registered in the state of South Carolina, and I have a patent now that has been approved for processing spent nuclear fuel to fuel salt for the fast molten salt reactor. That's what I'm really pushing. I enjoyed hearing your comments about getting out there and speaking up for nuclear. Why do you think that most utilities, when they had the opportunity, going back into the 70s and then from there on, failed to promote nuclear?
I can tell you, when I was Assistant Vice President Nuclear for the recovery of Davis-Besse back in the 80s, success was not finding ourselves on the front page of the local newspaper. And I think because of all the opposition that has occurred to nuclear, and because of the 3 Mile Island accident, the nuclear utilities, it sort of took an attitude of let a sleeping dog lie. In other words, instead of being evangelists, as I said earlier, and getting out there and really promoting it, it just seemed like the prevailing attitude was, hey, if we don't raise our hand and get out there and make noise, people will let us alone. And unfortunately, I think that's absolutely the wrong approach to take. So that's as short an answer as I can give you, Ken.
Thank you.
I think Joe Ortaldo may have a question or comment. Joe?
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Joe. Good to hear your voice.
Thanks for coming down. It's a great presentation you had there. But what are your thoughts about how the nuclear people and the greenhouse people could get together more effectively than we seem to? Because to me, that's one of the biggest drivers we have is if there's anything to the greenhouse theory, that really the only answer, as you pointed out, for the future is going to be nuclear. But yet sometimes we seem to be fighting each other more than joining each other.
Well, that's a good question, Joe. And you know, as I used to tell Cindy, in all these situations, follow the money. And that's why it takes, frankly, an education of our political leaders so that they can basically bridge that gap that you've just talked about. There's a place for wind and solar. I believe very much in a mixed portfolio. It just depends on the application. But I can tell you, wind and solar will never provide that broad base supply of electricity. What they can do is relieve demand in certain areas from time to time. And so, but they do increase the complexity and the difficulties and the expense of grid management to do that. So I think there's an opportunity for, particularly with the small modular reactors, to have a symbiotic relationship between the two, but it's not going to be easy to bridge that gap, and it's going to, quite frankly, in my opinion, take political leadership, and that takes education of our political leaders to the viability of nuclear power and the possibility of some complementary relationship between all of our sources of electricity.
I think that's the key, because when I was on the advisory board for the site, we used to get into that conversation quite frequently about people that would come in and say, well, solar or wind, that's going to answer our problems. But we never seemed to get across the understanding of the fact that, yeah, they're good and they got their slot. They might provide 20, 30% or whatever of what we need, but they're never going to be able to supply all that we need, and they're never going to be able to be turn the switch on and off, as you pointed out. But that to me is a real challenge. With some way that could be addressed, I think that would help an awful lot in getting the public support of nuclear.
Well, the key from a perspective of a vibrant economy, as I said in my earlier slides, is reliability. You need to have a supply of electricity that's absolutely what's called dispatchable. And that is that it can respond to the demand. And unfortunately, wind and solar are just the opposite. They cannot respond to the demand. They can only provide on an infrequent basis a supplement to that demand. And while that's not a bad thing that they can provide a supplement, it's just that there's nothing on the horizon that says that wind and solar will ever be able to supply the kind of electricity needed to reliably run our factories, which demand a lot of electricity, and other uses that demand that reliability that plants like nuclear and like coal and oil can provide. And of course, coal and oil have their own challenges. But again, that thing called capacity factor is what's so important for our economy.
I think I saw another question pop up, Allison.
Yeah, so the next question that came in was, do you think the US must lead setting the right standards for nuclear in the world, or if not the United States, who else would do it?
Well, my answer to that is absolutely. As I said in one of my slides, what's at risk here, the very high standards that we have set as a world leader in nuclear power, we're the ones that initiated and brought that in and exported that technology around the world. But in so doing, particularly after the 3 Mile Island accident, we've had an intense focus on safety, an equally intense focus on quality, and finally on this thing we call conduct of operations, which basically makes sure that things are done right the first time. I don't have the confidence that countries like China and Russia and India even will have that same kind of dedication to those factors that the United States has had.
I think we have one last question that just popped in.
Yeah, so the next question was, how do we win the political battle for nuclear energy support?
How do we win it?
How do we win the political battle?
Well, I wish I had a simple answer to that, but my answer has been here in the state of Ohio is to participate with local politicians and to go down and talk to the legislature, one-on-one or in group meetings to try to provide the same kind of information that I just provided in this presentation, and to get them educated to understand that what they're reading in the newspapers and what they're hearing from people like the American Petroleum Institute with regard to nuclear power being unsafe and not economical is just not the case. And And so we have to do that one-on-one or in group settings until we change the minds of our political leaders and get them to take the action needed to support nuclear.
Well, something else popped in.
Jim, I'm going to let you read that one.
Yeah, so this is kind of the punchline. So the question is, you really think that CNTA's mission is important to our country and the world?
Absolutely, absolutely. If the members of CNTA are not the ones out there talking about nuclear energy and nuclear power and other nuclear technologies like medical isotopes, for example, who else is going to do it?
Right. Thank you. And I will add to that I think our good friends at Southern Nuclear on the other side of the river, with all their outreach efforts, do a wonderful job of getting the word out. Unfortunately, we wish we could do that more nationally, but hey, every little bit helps, I think. And I think Dave absolutely emphasized what we need to do.
Again, thank you very much for inviting me to talk today, and I hope the presentation was useful.
Yep. All right, and then Chuck Munns just chimed in with that obviously there's a strong relation between Navy nuclear and commercial nuclear, and we got to continue that relationship and making each stronger.
Roger that.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave. At this time of the program, we would be giving you our ceremonial coffee mug for your speech, and I think we'll send you a virtual coffee mug unless you have one. Okay, you have one right there. So, but that is where we do. And so thank you so much for joining us today and kicking off our series. And I think it looked like it worked okay to me, and I think we hopefully can start doing some more of these in the future. And to close things off, just a few announcements. We are, in fact, hoping to do more Up and Atoms throughout the rest of the year. I think we can probably have one scheduled for almost every month through December. In fact, we already have one scheduled for October the 7th, which is going to be our friends at Savannah River Remediation talking about what they're doing right now and all their efforts. So stay tuned, members and friends, for updates and invitations to those upcoming Up and Atoms. A couple other announcements. We are planning to hold our golf tournament on October 2nd, and we are working very closely with Hounds Lake and others to make sure that we are doing all our work on social distancing and COVID safety as best as we can. So stay tuned for that information, and I think we're able to handle that, and hopefully through our efforts, it's going to be a very good event. We are also planning to have our young professional event on October 17th, which is the Low Country Boil event this year. It will be all outside, and the plan is to do that at Palmetto Golf Club again this year, and have it an all outside event and do our efforts to minimize interactions with folks. So we are still planning on doing that. So if you have interest, look for information on that for October 17th. And we are planning to do a virtual teller lecture this year. We are honing in on a date, so please stay tuned on those. We're working on our speakers right now, and it will be much like this format, and we're going to plan on doing our teller lecture virtually this year. So with that, I do not have anything else to add. Allison, I don't know if you have any other announcements to add.
Thank you all for coming, and look forward to the next one.
Yes, and thank you. And if you have any feedback on anything you think we may be able to improve, let us know. We are where we are right now, and I think we'll continue to go down this road for some time. So thank you all, and everybody have a great rest of your day.